Hey everybody, good morning, Robb. Guys, I think we have a pretty good video this morning. Last week I did a video on the $50 and up underground house book. Next week we're going to do a video on the almost free dirt cheap desert homestead by Philip Garlington. But this week we've got Lewis and Sharon Watson's book on the how to build a low-cost house of stone. This book was written back in 1978. Some prices have changed, but a lot of things haven't changed at all. Lewis built this house of stone back in 1972 for $2,000, and the property in Idaho cost him $2,000. So total, his house with the land cost $4,000 back in 1972. Now, one of the main reasons that Lewis wanted to build was because things had gotten so high. He was spending $200 a month for his rent. $200 a month for rent. So that drove him over the edge. And also he wanted to simplify his life and get away from the city and grow his own food and be independent and all those other things that people were doing back at land moving back in the 70s. Now, he had one advantage. He didn't have hardly any experience, hardly any money, but he did have a very good crew to help him build his house. This was his house building crew, his wife, his two daughters, 9, 11, and their dog and cat. And he ended up building a house with a metal roof with the walls. Let's go over the table of contents real quick. He talks about the reasons that he built with stone. And he goes over siding the house. A really good thought experiment about where would you live if you could live anywhere, which is a good thing to ask. It's a little experiment like, what would you do if you could do anything? And without worrying about income or family and obligations and so on, it kind of frees up the mind about what you really want in life. And that's what he did. And it's a very helpful thing to think about. He didn't use an architect. Nowadays, everything is digital. You can probably find architectural drawings. You can probably get help with an architect very inexpensively nowadays compared. Back in 1972, they didn't have the computers. They didn't have the internet. There was no Reddit. There was no way to get free information. Nothing was digitized. He designed the house himself. He goes over a tool of materials. A lot of information about gathering the stones, which was an eye-opener. Clearing the ground, setting up the forms, pouring the walls, the floors, the roof, finishing fireplaces, and miscellaneous. And then afterward, how he's found living in the house after a few years of living in it. So this is the house he built in Idaho. He purchased this land for $2,000, and the total of the building cost came to $2,090. Now, I think the price of inflation since then has probably gone up 4 or 5 times, so you would have about $10,000 in expenses compared to back then. This is a close-up of his walls and in the building location. He had a pickup truck and some basic hand tools. He used about, I think, 12 or 16 pickup truck loads of rocks. Most of the rocks he got were about the size of a football. There weren't that many big. Like on the front of the book, he uses a photograph showing holding a very large boulder. He said that's not that common. Most of the book, the stones were a small size. He also got a lot of even smaller stones to use to help fill and not use as much cement and concrete. He lived in the small travel trailer while he was building. Initially, he didn't build the house. He built a wooden storage shed and wood shed and workshop on the property. And that's recommended highly because if you are able to build a small outbuilding, it will give you confidence to do more. Also, you can see whether you're up to doing the building yourself. It's like when people build small boats, it's recommended to build a small dinghy that will be used with the boat. If you don't enjoy the building process and you can't build a dinghy, you don't want to spend 5 years building a boat. So same thing, he built the workshop and woodshed first out of the lumber that he got from salvaged houses that were being torn down and so on. This is one of my favorite photographs in the whole book. It shows him, I think this is either one of his daughters or maybe his wife, but you can see the sense of pride and accomplishment of having built all of the walls and put the roof on by himself. They had to have help to pour the cement for the footings for the foundation, and later on, after they built the house, they had another pour of cement. They didn't mix the cement and pour it themselves for the floors and the footings. But he built the rafters and so on. And the metal roof they put on themselves also. So it was really something of pride and accomplishment. This is the area. They looked into different other things they could build in the hills, and they had no forest or wood on their property or nearby that they could use for lumber. So they decided to go with stone because of what they had available. Now, it's a very small house. I think it's 48 by 24, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, which would be nowadays a very small house. But back then it was quite normal. Goes over the tools. This is the woodshed and workshop that they built prior. It's a funny photograph. He says that this top portion was not painted because the children could not reach up that high. There's their travel trailer they lived in. It took them a total of 9 months, but the walls only took 2 months. And he said, knowing what he knows now, he could have built the walls in 1 month. Now this is a close-up of the forms. The forms are 2x4s with plywood, and they have some long poles that help steady, and you level them, and then you pour in the stone and concrete. Different types of stones. He goes into great detail about what are the best types of stones and so on, and how to pick them and handle them. And he has a method he uses for storing the stone in the interior of the building to simplify and speed up the process. The goes over the foundation and pouring. Here's another good photograph. You can see this is the top edge of one of the walls, and they've got the form, and there's another form over here. So they just do one section at a time. They don't do an entire wall, and little by little. And here you can see where they're putting these stones down in the middle, and then using a lot of smaller stones, and then adding the concrete that they mixed up themselves. And pouring the walls. And he goes over in detail some of the mistakes they made and things to avoid. Here is a ground shot of how he stored different things that help them speed up the process and make it more efficient. How to level the walls and do the windows and the doors and the fixtures. And all of this was done by him and his wife. He was a school teacher. He had very little building experience, but he did make use of a lot of the information he could find in books and so on at the time, and he gives a bibliography in the end we'll go over. This is the only photograph I've seen of the interior of the walls. It's quite flat and uniform. It's not like the outside of the wall. And you can add insulation easier this way. He says that some people criticize the stone houses. They said they're very cold. And he said that actually his was not, it was much more comfortable than some people have written about in their criticism of stone houses. He did say there was like a flywheel effect if the temperature wasn't too high or too low, but if it was really hot or really cold for a long period of time, it did take longer for the walls to get back to equilibrium. The roof, I was surprised. He made it seem so simple. He built the frame. He made a pattern for the trusses, and once he got the first one, he used the first one as a pattern to make all of the trusses that were laid out on the floor of his house. And he poured the floor, and then he built the trusses on top of the floor, and then was able to erect them one at a time very quickly in just one day. So I was kind of surprised. Then he put the steel roofing on top, and he did his wiring and plumbing himself after looking at different books and so on. Now, I still think the biggest drawback to building something yourself is still the zoning and building codes. He was building in an area where the building codes were very lenient, and this was 1972. So I think your biggest obstacle and hurdle will be having a design that will meet your building codes, and then working with the building department to make sure that you're in code. Here's some designs of other forming systems that people have used, and tips and questions and answers and so on, and how he has enjoyed living in a stone house. Here's some of the advantages. He says you immediately stop paying $200 a month rent. I have to laugh at that. The personal security of owning your own house and your own land, and reducing your food expenses by you can have your own garden. You're out in the country. You're no longer keeping up with the Joneses. You're by having so much reduced expenses, he was able to quit his job and just have a part-time mail order job. Him and his wife. Extra leisure time, increased self-respect. He said, once you built your own stone house, you know that there's very little of a material nature you cannot do. And remoteness from the city, no traffic, crowds, smog, noise, violence, crime, and so on, etc. So there's all of the advantages he talks about. And here's him and his building crew. So the bibliography is pretty good. He recommends highly the book by Build Your Own Stone House by Carl and Sue Schwenke. I'll do a review of them later. And then there's other books he recommends. So it's definitely a book if you were thinking about building your own stone house. I think it's worthwhile to get. You can get this at your library. I'll leave a link to it for Amazon in the video description. And it's in 9 months he built this whole house, and for, like I said, $2,000 for materials. Next week, let's do this book, Rancho Castaneda. Mr. Garlington does not go into the exact detail as the Watsons, but it's very entertaining. It's part personal narrative of living out in the desert on property, 10 acres he bought for like $328 at a tax auction, and his house made out of scrap wood and cardboard and tires. It's a little bit different. I personally corresponded with Mr. Garlington, and he said his book was extremely popular with prisoners in federal prison that were wanting to live somewhere when they got out, I guess. But yeah, it's one of a kind book. I think you'll enjoy the review and the book. Next week, Rancho Castaneda, and another of our series on trying to live inexpensively here in the 21st century. All right, guys, take care. Hope you're enjoying this series, and see you out there.